benza sato samaya manu palaya benza sato teno pa tishari no me bawa soto kayo me bawa soto chayo me bawa Anarato me bhava sarva siddhi me parayesa sarva karma sutta me siddham shiyam kuru aha ho bangave sarva tata gata bezama me vesa beze bhava ma sammaya sato.
All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in a state of the most perfect and precious Buddhahood. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merits of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of the happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. I beseech the great Vajradhara, Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, Gampopa, Pakmodrupa, Lord Jigten Sungun, at the feet of the root guru, who possesses the three ways of kindness, and all the root gurus and spiritual masters of the lineage, the Idams and Dharma protectors. May your marvelous blessings permeate my mind.
Tongge to Jesha Jeresan Ryan Yamada, Jabon Sinjalo Jibaka. Shaji Jabi Javla Kusanza, Yarbenji Bula Karanje, Pimana Kalanda Rome, Dadalama Simba Kanons, Ordian Bajela Kusanza, Ishisan Kalachina Junguria and the boat on Drizalama. Jarvetin Bakon Lasanze Bakajur, Bojela Kusanza, Jimmy Satuji Jungo, the Madishizum Pachata. Tamjin Jimba Kumjin Jijanya Mindru Gonjan Zanza, Romi Chijin Jabolana, Dosanje Gonjan, Ransen Jugon, Zondon Zepe, Zaba Lame, Jabla Zanza, Dazo Simji, Lochus and Rover Sinjalabus, London Rover Sinjalabus, Lantrobas was Sinjalabus and Trubai is and Javas Sinjalabus. Tomar de Churo Tamala, Terena Janjava Gabochon, Tene Samdutaki de Tanje, Tene Terena Caps Papa, Da Chucheni, Tenechin, the Tene Tomar de Tamaketene, Samba Sancho Simjeti Simbogone, Tene Tambichu Simbarchus, Tene Chusimbakalayang, Tene Tambo. Nuju Jungsum si Kazan Kondishipana Yirin Dona, Semayang Bagone, Tene, Yapo Ninja, Tene Ninja de Yi la Yoja, the sort of Kitchenbores, Sanji Chumdin de Song, Likbar Rab the Nuna, Yi la Zongche song, and Tene Yapo New, Tene Yi la Zonas, Tene Caps Papa Huzate, Tene, Tamchi Sajaji Mongading, Ngondro. Tene te Ngondro telaya tumong da tumong mai pe chepa Ngondro yupaka ne tene tumong Ngondro lodo namba ye ke nane tene tara kapsa papa tene tara covid nimek shibata te indo na ngaranzo Sipa Devan Zimpi Nipolan Corbin Nimek Samba Seta Tenatini Drengas Mashigins.
Dharma friends, I'm happy to see you again today. Dashi Delek. So today again, since we're listening to the Dharma, please listen to the Dharma with the motivation of bodhicitta. And as you mentioned before, we should be free from the three faults of the vessel or the hut, and which means that we should be without distraction and listen to the instructions well. And then also it's important to keep them in mind. And the Buddha also said that. He said we should listen well and then retain the instructions. And so now we come back to the instructions on the fivefold path of Mahamudra, the preliminaries to the fivefold path of Mahamudra. And the preliminaries are threefold. There are the common, the uncommon, and the special preliminaries. And so now we are in the common preliminaries, which are the four thoughts that turn the mind. And of those four, we are now speaking about the shortcomings of samsara, which is an antidote to the attachment to the happiness of samsaric existence.
다 kapsi papa yipane tetara lela rebu yupar ngijang tsender jina sama chendana ndra nyamna ndrowa rikto kang jijang dongan bahima to mipe kovenimik gombala som ta ngarazo tene 다 담주 준비를 보지 톱 yes 담주 준비를 보지 톱 요래데 얘나한테니 로버트더니 인지고 추진인데 거마다바랑 인데 드네 말아서 종용 거래서 단 너는 치기래스 드네 다 ngaran soketa chugu yore de yena ya sta tetara legendary yu ta chitan legendary yu ni chang sin don zo chen de le jibo rina sama kare rina ya rigire sama te non du res teni ngaran ke tara le ti za ponde teni tamju jimeli top te teni dong yu par chi gor ma to teni chima leji jisindani mi sonsum la soba tan do dinun kowana no kondu yore mato chiran chego kabla chiran tini mi par chandu yo mari sitan do dina jiwa ngama jiwa sama sikhe do jiwa sama yore chiran dara ludinji ta janga chendle chiborina ri karina ri rwa sama yuna mishi mina mishi rwa ta kanda ngana dara chiborina rigi yo sana te noris jiwa sama ting ting yore anu dara chuta jiwa ngapsi ke manani to zoke ta o lun chuba kalatini ko lun jiba kalatini sema mi par cha ro lu shuba kal sema sha do de mi par cha ro be na nga sun chume pa de ni nam se de me ya se nam ya se sama mi li cha do de ro chi rigri samita de yang nga so ta jamping betawas mate betawa tsina na yong gu ro je sma mi ba ha so sam de tang ge de mari se je wa nga ma de sma tin tin yo re se go ta de na nga so ta ra chang ro lo mo ya bo de ti yo na ben chang de xie yong na ko chang mi ba cha mo mi ba cha de ro chi je wa de le lu xing na de ni se mi ba cha ne mi ba cha yo ma tin tin yo re se go ta
So now we have found the precious human body, but then this body is subject to disintegration, so that means it is impermanent. We're going to die, and then when we die, there also is a result of our karmic actions. And so even though that's the case, we still may wonder, so it's whether or not a future life really exists. So often we think that as long as I'm happy in this life, that's enough. We don't think too much about future lives. So that's a mistake, because so now we have found the precious human body, and we have to make it very meaningful. And when we die, then we follow our karma and we continue to wander in samsara. So when you die, you do not just disappear. There are past lives and there are future lives. So even though you might be happy in this life or not, but you might just think that I don't know if there's really a next life, and that's a mistake. There surely is a next life. So there is those who don't really accept the dharma and past and future lives and think that when the body dies, then also the mind just goes out of existence. And so just like a butter lamp, when the oil is all used up, then the butter lamp just disappears. So just like that, we disappear. We think that. So that's kind of a materialistic view, a non-Buddhist view, thinking that there are no future lives, but there sure are future lives. For example, some people think that when they paint a picture on a wall and then the wall collapses, then together with that, the picture collapses and it all just disappears. And then there's nothing, no wall and no picture. So when the body dies, then the mind just also disappears. But so that is not the case. There surely is a future life.
다 지방 하마 스마 유바 수하고 그랬으나 산지에 그랬더니 송띠 드네 다랑아랑 속에 아 케바 남제 따라 산지에 그랬더니 까탄 롱당 드네 제베 체마 남제 송 또도 좀 망보 나나 따나더니 지방 합서 요래 송도와 생아랑 속에 양 따나야 제 생각되니 박차기 중 유대 배송로치 아주 잠못당나 연구 요래스 배나 따라 드란 가장 따라 부부 중요도 속에 제와 하마 그 리팅 팅데니 망보 연구도 하시 출력 주님이 된죠 출력 캠 밀린죠 던데야 부부 던데 제인데 드네야 코란 속에 제와 하마 가 드네 롱바 가와이 파마 가와이 사차 가와이 파마기 닝의 쳐전에 소소게 되는 년 가려니 버도 제인도 니들은 같이 빼 망보 그도 그래서 지방 하스 좀사세야 돼 이게 년 통수 따라 된지는 때빼 망보 따라 지방 하스 팅이 뭐 망보 것도 와서 그래서 무슨 체마를 왔어 ongan 지방 하면 드네 디나는 지에요레스 마찬티나나 로와 롱바 드나레스 드네 다랑 우스 드난 로는 용의 힘디오스 때 우스 요대바 드네 코랑 간지 종유바 종로 종다 참아 희에인데 드네 때 리링은에 던지 종을 있어야 그래서 오늘 영어도 왔어 다도 줄로 민족 줄로 하마오죠 소연 지향 합스들 진트미 시트미 여래 되는 가서 보온다고 자기나 따라 라마 지친 특별 망보기 지향 하마 하거니 부 중종도 엉아트니 든지 인신이 또 망보야 요대를 또 남타는 다른 거 지저를 레스
So who is the one who knew that there are past and future lives? And the Buddha taught that, and also there are many great holy masters who have followed the Buddha's teachings, and they have in their teachings. Also, when we look at them, we can see all these teachings on past and future lives. And also, actually, if we just look at our own mind, there seems to be this continuum of imprints within the mind. So, for example, there are many children who are able to remember their previous lives when they're very young. Even those children often who are not born in a family of religion, but still some very young children, they remember like what country or what place they came from in a previous life and who their parents were and what were their parents' name and what were their own names. I saw that in a lot of different writings that actually there's a lot of these children who can remember. And these are all real stories. So they know that I was, for example, born in this particular family, and that was their name, and that's where they're from. And then sometimes when they went to check the authenticity of that, then they found that this is really true, and they found those people there, and then they knew exactly, for example, how they had died. And then, so when you ask those people there, then the people say, yes, this is true, there is this person who died here, and so on. So that happens a lot also among people who don't even have the Dharma, any religion. They still remember often their previous lives. And in Tibet, for example, there are many lamas or turkus who are able to remember their previous lives. And then there's many children in this world also who can remember exactly like the kind of the storyline of their previous lives.
Jiwa sama ke lu ling go res tene leji jisandani jiwa sama lu ling tene a jiwa sama se se du tene ngana son roa ro na no ko yung go dan do du na roa ro na no ko yung du tene dan roa ro na na tene ko dongham ba hi ma to tene dechi kan heo mare se go re ko na no ko se tene ko na dongha jira yin du tene donghar shada 나는 거고 요레스 대인데 되는 거 좋지 다라 첸도 자침보리 제와스마 가야 기침보 말이 섬지요 말레스 제와스마 기침보레스 가승아 좀 코와는 코용원이나 다들 류나기스네 코고를 제와스마예요 다들 류는 거는 대와 자침보도와 빼는 수고 대탕 자침보도와 총사와 랑로와 빼 기침보도와 대인데 되는 제와스마나 디나이리 an kap de ko de ke tin kare langwa yena ya de kap de yang ko cha chim bo cha go res.
And so when we die, we leave this life behind. When our body dies, then we follow our karma and we take on another body. Then we wander anywhere in the 6 realms of samsara. And wherever we go in samsara, there is only suffering. We cannot find any happiness there. So the nature of all samsara is suffering. And so therefore we shouldn't think that it's just this life that's important and the next life isn't important. Because just like in this life, our body is important. Once we have moved on to the next life, then this life becomes very important to us. So right now, for example, it's very important to us that we are healthy, for example, or that we are successful in our business. And the future life is just like that. So just like we find our present existence in this body is very important, in a very same way, once we are in our next life, then that life becomes very important to us.
동아 망보도 가르치네 레게 나한테 룬더야 레게 룰랑데 요래 대인데 대와도 동아 동아 망보 너는 담아고 동아게 나는 로도아스 대나기 끼와 스마야 나한테 루 가와랑바이나야 고 동아라 이는 누구 요래서 코아 동아지라 이게리스 대인데 당아나 좀 코와데 동아인 바라인 동아데 간디인 바 배낭아나 좀 코와데 and do sigido and do sending sonsum tourism sigidan dordina ludi kawalama inako tin kowana kawalama ina dongan bahiri sigota tadi dongade imbarangi tini korere gen mayung dos do.
So also in this life we experience already a lot of suffering. And the reason we experience suffering in this life is because of our karma. We have taken on this body because of our karma. And then due to that, we experience a lot of happiness and suffering, but ultimately it is all suffering. And so then wherever we take birth in a future life in samsara, since it is samsara, its nature is suffering. So we speak about the 6 realms of samsara. There is the 3 lower realms and the 3 higher realms. Wherever one takes birth, there's only suffering. So now we are speaking about each of the sufferings in the 6 realms of samsara.
다 근데 토마르드니 로아 르도기나네 되니 니소섬 티나네 되니 당보 냐로 동아 대시엔 거레스 되니 냐로 동아 때라 되니 나한서 되니 냐 감좁지 시기도 남주 냐로라 냐 감좁지 냐로 코란에 다 대칭 만다와 좁지 요레스 겨다 텔레 당보 때라 되니 사브 삼녀지 세거레스 당보 삼녀지 마요고도스 삼녀지 지랑 Ngondro do Ngondro don't change like Madame love.
So then so in the 6 realms of samsara, so of the 6 realms of samsara, the first are the 3 lower realms, and in the 3 lower realms there's first the hells, and there are 18 different hells. And so first there is 8 hot hells, so which are the reviving hell, the black line hell, the crushing hell, the howling hell, the great howling hell, the hot hell, and the hell of extreme heat, and then the hell of unending torment.
참여 얘기나네 되니 담보대 되니 양수세야 되리 양수 때라 동화 간지 연구요래 세나 되니 짝석이 삽지 때나 단도 되는 짝석이 삽지 다 뒤때는 다나 냐로 심지 탐지 레왕게 되니 루트나 랑래다 레가 왕게 루트나 랑데 되니 찍게라 노 셈제네 로와 되니 찍게 되니 세 뜨부여다 그래서 담보 저저걸 짝석이 삽이는 요르다 그래서 동화 산지 마셔봐요 얘네야 제방 뭐마 얘는 노 셈세네 되니 다 해당의 거는 심지만 뭐 파스 세 뜻들 딜레난 트팔티네 박찰티네 되니 거기로 다라 짝석나는 그래서 양수나는 찌되나야 되니 딘나는 요데 심지 탐지 찍게 되니 해당계는 찍찍 세게 요레스 세네 근데 저는 동안용 들으뇨 되니 찍게 세서도 야 자자한테 되니 야 순로야 레게테 만체 세서도 야 수 근데 저는 리링 거 요레스 야시 코란 그나나 동아한테 주만체 버티는 애들 심지 참 주만체 버 근데 다 동아 요레스
So in the first hell, which is the reviving hell, so we take beings take birth in this hell through the force of their karma, and so once they are born in this reviving hell, they naturally have this hatred against each other, this wish to hurt one another. So first of all, they are in this kind of burning place, this a terrible place where they already experience suffering on its own. And then on top of that, through the force of their karma, they experience various confused perceptions where they see each other and they are angry at each other, and they strike at each other with different weapons, and until they die, they kill each other. And so then there appears this voice in the sky that says, be revived again. And then these beings once again come alive, and then they repeat this kind of suffering over and over again. And so this suffering is marked by this hatred against each other. And so again and again, they strike and they kill each other and are revived again. So all of the sentient beings in this hell experience unending suffering.
니바데 팅나스 다 팅나스인데 드니 양코 냐베 데친치르와 드니 디나노 요데베 데친탐 탄 도르드니 냐 감쪽예세야데 마랑토 먼저오치 차야나 Taramani knocking a zumba to Solitini, Chepa Manda to Euro, Chepa to Dungan and take door. Don't have the Chinam and Mambo Tetando, Tina, Yit, and Yabu de Chinan. Tini Chepatina Yit in Rama to Yores, Tina, Hipatege, Takarichi dosena, Tina Natini, Tina Ganamichi and do, Tini Zubul, Tina Sego, take young, the Zubul take yan. Zubul take yan, Tini charge a solid, Trala Subagatini, Lanky, Tamtini, Marchi, Tobidua, Zupo Gentum, Nanzara, Tempos in it is okay, Re Tevana is in Zupoma, Janatum, yes. Nyabatina, don't Yabu Dunga to Namju Yabu Dunga, you race and to Namju Sungu was. Then the Tinit test, Jingan Soma, Koyen and you, they by in the test, my Huyan Samson's regent.
So the second one is called the Black Line Hell. And so again, this is a second hell of the 18 hells. And so in each of these hells, the beings experience a different kind of suffering, which is like kind of like a punishment that, for example, there is different kinds of criminals, prisoners who receive different kinds of punishment for their crimes. So in each of those hells, we experience different kinds of suffering or kinds of punishment. And so in this Black Line hell, then for instance, so on the being's body, there appear black lines, and these are used kind of to mark their bodies. And then alongside those black lines, they are cut by burning axes and saws and so on. So just like a piece of cotton cloth, because they are cut, their bodies are cut in that way. So we often speak about the hell. There's a lot of suffering. But now I thought we go, since we have the text here, we go through each of the sufferings of the hell realms.
Totini captain did Dumasa, Machapures, Tarangansola, there's in Zuichi Matam, the Casset Dunga, Zupo comes on going you, some get them to the chin to your race. Tadonko lay on getting Machavichin, young to part of the certain yard part of the Sunday and you tend to change in it. Never your race, never Tinaga Dunga. Never Tinaga Simchina.
So, for example, if you imagine you're cutting some wood with a chainsaw, with an electric chainsaw. So just like that, this is how their bodies are being cut. And so once their bodies are cut up, then instantly the flesh reassembles, becomes one again, and then they're cut again. So the suffering is just unimaginable. For example, if you just imagine how much pain we have when we just cut our finger a little bit, but for them, it's their entire body from head to foot, the body, all the pieces, part of their body, the flesh is completely cut up. And then through the force of karma, then all these cut up pieces, then they reassemble together again, and then they're whole again, and then they're cut over and over again. So this is the incredible suffering experienced by the hell beings in the Black Line hell.
Teni sumba dunjom rida dunjom Kenya simchi to so donga continue go resena jak tung khong den ta do den jak tung bi chen bo den yo ro den den na teni nyap simchi mangbo yo teni simchi mangbo teni lanking to so ke teni nya wa ka thwa chen bo den ja teni chama ten na ma dong ro do was dong na teni den de na teni donga sa ji ma cha ben yo re yang ngak che wang ma ta simchi yin ba se gan jo simchi yin ba ta simchi cha khan de se gan teni te ta bas teni ta simchi to so teni lu cha le tab de ba teni to so pe chen bo to so yong ne teni to so pha to dung kha jan da mo ra pa lu che wa na gi dung kha jan teni tin na yang zhen ne se teni chi go teni na cha go res.
Then third is the crushing hell, and so the in that hell, the beings who live there are crushed between like different like iron or metal objects like mountains and so on, or sometimes the henchmen of hell come with large hammers and crush the many sentient beings who are together in this space, and then they experience the suffering of death, and then they come back to life again and experience it over and over again. And so that's also due to the karmic result of having killed in previous lives, that now also their bodies is being crushed. Or for example, sometimes a crush between two things. For example, imagine being crushed between two cars and so on. So beings are completely crushed, and then they are revived again, and then they experience this suffering over and over again.
Tene ngombu simjine nyabu ngombu simjine tene jaksa khangba do tene jaksa khangba nan chi ro jaksa khangba nan chi ne tene pe tonga nyu ne tene ta nga cho ro chi sin ngombu si ga ta tele ngombu si do tene te cha de ngombu nga pa de ngombu chimbo ri do ngombu chimbo te chiba ri do ta ra ya nyabu tan do tene nyabu jaksa khangba nan chi ne tene so me chimbo ta ne me being it in it, and then Hatang Mumbu Chimbos in the Jorochi,
so then the fourth hell is the howling hell or lamenting, and so their sentient beings are they're stuck in these, scorched in this burning enclaves, enclosures, these kind of houses and so on, and then inside there, then they're crying out for help, and so so then they experience so the suffering there of crying and being stuck in this place, and then so that's the fourth one, and then the fifth one is the same, but it's more intense. So the fifth hell is the great howling, great lamenting hell, where again they're in the same kind of burning kind of environment, this building, and then they're crying even louder, crying, "Help me!" So that they're crying out for help.
Tukpa chawane tene ta nu chimbono tene zong do as chochu kumas tene zong nyabu simpi tabi dinana ma pen tene zong do ta tene ya tong go sam ya tong ne khala tong tene nyabu len khin nam tene cha ji kampa ta jaksa kampa go zong tene ma pen tene yang golon twa ye tene chi yores.
And then there is the hot hell, and then in that hell, there's many sentient beings together are caught in this large pot where they are like boiled in the heat, in the fire, and many sentient beings together are thrown in there, and then so they are boiled in this hot fire, and then when they come to the surface of that hot liquid, then the henchmen of hell, they come with different iron tools and hammers and so on, and then they knock the sentient beings over their head, and then they go down again.
Rabta chawane teni jajin khambana chipari jaksang khambana chi dadong teni jaksa jaktor tin soji ma kambani ya zo nungbo juzun manong go tendesine teni jaksu janjang zo ne teni ji dos.
So then the sixth hell, seventh hell is the extreme heat, hell of extreme heat, and so it's similar, but the heat is even more intense. So many sentient beings together are in this kind of like house or kind of environment of heat that is burning, and here they are also impaled by burning iron spears and experience a lot of suffering through that.
Ta nyaba nami se ta nyaba thamji gna ni ko dunga chi hi derwa tene and dona dan dordin jaksa kipa tang jaksa pa rana pongyal tin tinanama tani sa sei trichido as.
Then there's the eighth hell, which is the hell of the endless torment, and so here that's the worst of hell, where beings experience the greatest suffering. And so here also the sentient beings are stuck living in this like place of heat and being burned constantly.
Dan dordin tini nyarwa 찬야지 들으리 되니 찬야지에 다 틴타코드 되니 메마오 오 로냐진 담푸드 담푸소 라드로면 나철 샤말라이 돈보 타친지 초르단 도르드네 되니 크란소 마슬로는 루트인 거와 참자 다 주고서 마 주인데 파타디 페 요조 닝지오는 도나 판로디 되니 코 메마모 워 신 도르드네 메 풍보는 마 강발라 참만 너네 친구 로냐진 담스는 페나타 파타나 페 오 지지보지도 사타나 러트 파르트 드나데 양나테 참마 로냐지 담신다 너는 단접 페 쪽반 단접 드니 디나나 드니 바시 속찬자마데 작은 바시 드니도 속 소자사야 드니 포드 담바 소사야 카헬 파티인디 페 모장로 뜻을 주서 기본다서 러트 드니 아트선 충자 요데바 단도드나 대답은도드나 가와서나 드니 동하지라지 드니 샤말로 돈보세야 뜻소야 파타나 페 싱동로 닝기워지 요데바 타나 팡원은 로인데 드니 페 싱싱의 작은 제마 장장 레이데죠 드니 판 깜바 쪼선데 고 소네 짝소는 주데죠 나 가와서는 카트나 꼬요고요 봐 대답은 너는 동아 사지 마쳤던데 유사레스.
So these are the 8 hot hells, and then there's those neighboring hells. There's 4 neighboring hells called. There's the pit of life embers, and there's the rotten swamp, and the plain of razors, and the forest of swords, and the forest of shalmali tree, the river of hot ashes, and so on. So then sometimes when those sentient beings escape from those hells, those hot hells, then they come out of these hot hells, and from a distance they see this nice place to go. But once they actually get there, then this place turns out to be like a pit of hot embers, hot fire. And once they're in there, then their legs and their head and everything becomes burned. Or another time they escape from there, and then they come to a place where they think this is a beautiful place, but once they get there, it turns into this like filthy, rotten swamp that is filled with like insects that eat them and so on. And then again, they come to a place that they thought is a nice place, and then it turns out to be like a forest that's made out of razor blades, and wherever they go, they are being cut and they experience so much suffering. Or sometimes they escape from there and they come to the forest of Shanmali that seems to be like a forest of nice trees in the distance, but when they actually get there, then it turns out that everything is made of razor blades, and it cuts their legs wherever they go. Whichever direction they turn, they experience intense suffering.
So then
regarding the lifespan, how long those beings live in those hells, it varies, but it is from like a billion years and in human years now, like a billion years and up to 60,000 years and so forth. So in brief, it's a very, very long time.
다 장원냐 봐. 로와 자냐지. 자냐지 말 로로는 라인데.
So then next are the 8 cold hells, which are called first the blistering hell, then second the bursting blister hell, and third the like grinding teeth hell, fourth the like wailing hell, fifth the like a cold hell, and sixth the splitting like an utpala flower hell, and seventh splitting like a lotus hell, and eighth splitting like a great lotus hell.
다 자냐르제데 다 소소 노르드나 다 냐르 셈진 줌통 코란서 줌통게 코란서 다 랭인 바방게 되니 다 장원냐와는 제용고 여러 와시 들 장원나 냐와테 되니 하짱게 되니 장원냐와스 단 빼는가서 아 빼는 남시 장모 유스더니 남주르더니 강단 착과차데서 되니 롱 장모 유사 대답 레트 담망보 단어 장거 여러 와시 되니 디나는 대답은 되니 다냐로 자냐스야 돼 룰링이 걸어 와시 그런서 되니 룰링인데 되니 그런서 다 장한테 하장게 되니 될라야 자냐 될라야 제 용도 제데 가르치 용거잖아요 그런데 자네 진짜 나한테 찍바데 빼야는 따라 장로를 안장 요구도 안장 자체 자체 나이 세네들이 자체 나이 세네들이 자냐데 소지 되는 시기도 와시
So in the cold hells, also the sentient beings who are born there due to the force of a kind of collective similar karma, and experience the suffering of cold and freezing there. So, for example, it's just like the cold we experience when it's snowing outside and there's a lot of ice and an ice cold wind is blowing and so on. So it is just many times colder and more freezing than that. So, for example, so in each of those 8 cold hells, there is kind of a level of it gets increasingly colder. It gets more and more cold. For example, in your fridge, your freezer, you have different levels, right? You can kind of adjust the levels, like from 1 and 2 and so on. So it can get colder and colder. So just like that, in each of those 8 cold hells, it gets increasingly cold.
다 담보대 추버진 시바도 냐 자냐르게 담보래 추버진 해야 돼 하장게 장자네 근데 zu보라 다 추버동 거서 선 캥로라 너는 캥네 마 추버지 대 담보래 추버 도와 진세 하장게 니바들이 하장게 되니 효치엔데 되니 추버에서 파 개용도 하시 될 추버 도와 진세 Teni data teni toha saji macam de teni kani teni dah nenga done achu sewa teni dah tan tela achu ko teni nying de tiga rang kap de teni donga la pa teni nying de teni chi tag do ase.
So, for example, the first cold hell is the blister hell, where it's so cold that the whole body, the flesh freezes and it turns into blisters. And then the second is the bursting blisters hell, where it's even colder than in the first hell, so that the blisters you already had on your flesh then begin to burst open. And so the suffering is unimaginable. And then, so each of those hells is given a name depending on the suffering that they experience. So one, for example, is called, in Tibetan, is like Achu hell, which is a sound that we make like brr, like so cold. So each of these hells has a specific name to depending on the suffering we experience.
Tani hachang chang de tani jihu sene tani soso nyang ge da chang tele jihu tani da chang ma ne dan do de nga so da so tamba ka chang ma de hachang chang chang tele so tamba.
And then the next one is called also this like sound that we make when we are cold. So it's gihu in Tibetan, which means like wailing. Oh, it's so cold. And so we are basically beings are lamenting here, crying out in cold. And then the next one is called the grinding teeth, where it's so cold that they can't even let out a sound anymore. They're so cold that their teeth are completely gritted together.
Tene sotham balab saso ta pema tar kepa se tene hatyang chang de pema tar tene zupo de kayo gar tambe ya tambe sin papa kayo ta papa cho kane tene tele pema tar kepa se tene ta don hatyang chang ru ta chang sun tene opar tar kepa se ta tambe je se ne chur tene papa kayo ma Apart the chair capacity, temperature, the temperature, jukes in the car, that into the glass. Tate of the Tanya J say.
And then there is the splitting like an Utpala flower. So then it gets first like a lotus flower. So then it gets even colder. And so then the flesh begins to completely split. So one splits into, first in this hell, one splits into 4 pieces. And then in the next one, the Utpala hell, splitting like an Utpala hell, one splits into 8 pieces. And then in the splitting like a great lotus hell, then it gets even colder and the body then splits into 16 pieces. So this is the 8 cold hells.
There's a chung or chung. Tene ta tik der khat je de tene lo jarin sanatin dere ma songnes te maslo tab de na nam che le ter khat je de zo sigires ye na ya jamu nya wala che son simchi de che ta don te le chang tene ringa yore se tan do de na.
So then what about the lifespan of a being born in a cold hell? There's this measurement which is called like it's called the Magada, as like a storehouse of 80 like Magadas. So basically maybe it's 100 kilograms or so. So you have this huge kind of container, and then imagine that every 100 years you take out a single sesame seed. So there's this 100 kg of sesame seeds, and every 100 years you take out a single seed. And when the container is finally emptied of the seeds, so that's how long the lifespan of a being in the first of those cold hells is.
다 너는 3년 뒤에 다 4년 뒤에 휴송한 주도리다 디칼은 녀치 년코니시 니요거 단 너들은 녀치 년코니 냐바데 가와이는 가리는 릴링거 돼서 쳐는 링거를 드니 코 바르도 드는 링거를 행동 드는 링도 그런 단 너들 랭이 바로와 드니 동하 용네 사지 마쳐 동하 용네 심지를 르라 드니 심지 작창만 보고 사대바 든들 르리 tani a khashi pen do na khran so lu le de tani to kan pa jor dam de ka apa teni dona ni kundra zita de tendu yungu do to so te nyechi ni ko nya bu ha re isum go de ta bu teni donha koran so sa je ma cham nyung go koran so khahi che ring bo pe ka pa de teni tendu yungu sa khahi ya lo jap tha sa khahi ya nyima re la ya chini tendu nyechi nyung ko ge dara to so simchi nya bu simchi tendu yu re isum go che de mi ba
So and then with each of the hells, it gets the life gets longer. So these are the 8 hot and the 8 cold hells. So these are 16 hells, and then there is 2 more. There is the neighboring hells and the kind of 1 day life hells. So and they're the beings in those different this other 2 hells here beings take birth in various different places, such as in like water or in a rock and so on, due to the force of karma, and they experience inconceivable suffering there. Or for example, they are eaten alive by hundreds and thousands of other different sentient beings, or they're stuck in a rock and experience pain all the time. Some for a very long time, some for many aeons, and some for hundreds of years, and some hells only last a single day. So their lifespan in those hells is uncertain.
Dona nyaru simjin so le chese pares na ta le he dang go ne teni simjin yin so je ya ba simjin yin so ha ya mang bo je ya ba teni simji chang mang bo so je ya ba dik pa top chim bo se ne dan do de na teni nyawa na je yo ren dona nga ran so ta nyaru le ka se na nu sim he dang dan khun jin teni tu so ge teni lu de teni nyawa la je yo res teni ta dona 소소 들행아 현도에 가르치는 시기를 세나시 맞고 녀와 시바데 하고 녀부 동하 시바 하고나 드는 가서 진낭게 오네 드니 진낭게 드니 디나는 깨야가 저 드니 막 방고레스 대스는 시거다.
And so what's the karma of being born in those hells? It is hatred and having killed a lot of sentient beings with hatred. So it is the result of actions that come from a very strong, very powerful evil actions, and also having killed, for example, many, having repeatedly done that. So mainly hell is the karma of an evil mind that wish to harm others, a mind of hatred, resentment, and so on. And so in brief, the reason why we speak about it today is because when we think about the suffering, when we understand the suffering of hell, then fear arises in our mind, and then we will abandon the causes of birth in hell. So that's why we talk about it.
양의 심지인 소주 마녀 심지인라 누세시 마녀 삼나 나도 녀와는 제게 말이 삼나 나도 제왕 누마야 심지인 소제 요시바리 다다야 나도 주를 따는 걸 해당 가치도 로와 심지인은 누세 가치 제hen도 로와 심지인 소 마치자 셈나는 누셈 가치도 심지인 누셈 해당 가치 제도 저 요대반에는 줄은 얇을 제 요대레스
So some people might think that, oh, I've never killed anyone, and I also don't really want to harm anybody. So therefore, I will not take birth in hell. But we don't really know what exactly we did in a previous life. It's possible that we did that in a previous life. And even now, when you look at your mind, you can see how much anger is there in my mind, and how often do I wish harm upon others. And so even though you might not have killed somebody, we still have this wish to harm others. We still have a lot of anger in our mind. And that is the very cause of birth in hell.
다 니바디 여다와 여다기 동하
Then second is the suffering of the hungry spirits.
여타라 이티 니 시기도 생나네 바당 칼라주와 니신
So there is two kinds. There is those who live in the vast oceans, and then those who live kind of scattered on the land or the air.
다 담보 생란에 배 여다 때라더니 서주바 진다 난그 주바진 신시에 용도 서주바진데 단도드는 여다 코랑 깝들더니 여다 띠 대친텔라 드니 동아 가는 용거 요미 다 대시에 거 다 서주바진텔라 로 잡차 멍볼라 로 잡차다 동차 멍볼라 드니 치 특바 자면 코랑 속에 맹자면 투투구면 더시 맹자면 뭐 특바 teni hajang tishin kone ta tong kona ke teni nane donga ke nane tendre teni te tondo teni tan do de nga saji chi era thungji chi era sane ti to ko men ba de ta donga ke men pen nga so shama chi de ta sama mazin shibi kable do shama sim no mazin teni kable kache yor phaching nga so shama sim no mazin sama mazin so yuje maria mazin ta de ha ko yo maria donga kache yo 얘는 가서 야마 찍서 사마 맞을 때 쓰요래 흉내 된 갑래 가세도 사마 맞을지 아 되는 가서 따라 강야 만통어지 초 만통 들으시는 되니 강이 떼스도 기다지면도 그런스다 니마 찍기자마 로 찍기자마 로 잡차잖아 그런스다 동야도 사야 맹자에 투투고만 얘는 레긴 치고만 대답더니 다 뒤도 끝나네 되니 동안용 거요레스
So there, for hungry spirits, there is also those with outer obscurations and those with inner obscurations, and so there are different divisions where they experience different kinds of suffering. So those with the outer obscurations, for instance, they experience the suffering of intense hunger and thirst for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so for all this time, they never find a drop of water. They don't even hear the sound of water. And so constantly, they only experience hunger and thirst all the time. And they try to find, all they are doing is trying to find some food and find something to drink. So that kind of this thirst, this blazes in them like fire. But they never find anything. And so if we imagine how that is, how difficult it is for us for one day or 3 days. Probably most people have never even experienced that, not eating for just 3 days. So we don't even know how that is, but we might know how difficult it is to not eat for 1 day, because we have done the Ngondro retreat, for example. So we know how hard even just that is, to not eat and to not drink for just 1 day. So that's a little difficult, but it's not a huge difficulty compared to them. For them, it's not a matter of days, but they experience this suffering for many years, hundreds and hundreds of years. They don't even hear the sound, the name of food and drink. But then due to the force of karma, they do not die and they continue to experience suffering.
아코나도 장이 땅도 봐 장는 볼에 천도 산더니 천도 산단도 더니 쳐요마 쳐 감스터 양 카키 신나도 빵칸도 산 다양 단안도 들으시 더니 세탕은 준로 그래서 더니 야가 빼는 남시 차우갑라고 참 차와 찬도 장무갑로 참마 장모 찬도 단 너는 지도 단테는 차도 그동안 망보는 거요래 더니 참서 사만도 때 라고요나 양 힘밖에 송대 봐 다때 살은로디 되니 양 힘밖에 되니 나라페 손차 라서 자네 되니 베 사마로 베지 되니 앞에 룰라 강이때야 다때 다선 논나 농하 망보는 거요레스.
And so sometimes from a distance they see water, and then when they go there, then it has all dried out. So first it seems, or maybe it seems like there's this forest, this oasis, and then they go there, and then it all becomes like this desert, plain of sand. Nothing is there. And so constantly, therefore, they go around experiencing intense suffering of hunger and thirst. And sometimes they find food, but then it is protected by others, and they can't have it. Or if they try to get it, then others attack them with weapons, and they won't let them have it. So they end up experiencing this constant suffering of hunger and thirst. And so also their perception of heat and cold is kind of turned upside down. So when it's cold, it appears to them hot. When it's hot, it appears to them cold. Like summer and winter are turned upside down. So, for example, when it's cold in winter, then they experience it as heat, and when it's hot in summer, they freeze. Or the moon, for example, has a cooling quality, but for them it is extremely hot. Or the sun, which has a warming quality, for them it is extremely cold.
Nang drapachin yuda hibatela rimba hachang chawa. Ro ka hachang chung be chung rimba hachang chao. Kan kap kim exam se kap ngana dolo tsemji yuwa. De gitara kurban risa chung yuwa. Ka tina gi chung. Tene rimba be chao. Zupo hachang yurjona gi be chimbo. Ro zupo be chimbo. Tene kala be chao. Tene tende yongo yores. 다 코란서 때니 베 지도 휴비요로 와 지도 참스 사마 주니 말아 가시 뜻을 하나야 때니 뜻을 야사 때니 니 누구 말아 충충무세요 말아 두고 야트에요 말 두고 침모로 일종점지 두고는 일종점 빼침모 다 가시 라나 때니 베 주고 지고차 깔락 지 차투문도스 베는 하나서 따라 롱바 카키 때니 사마사야 민지 롱바 베 춘통함지 롱바 카키를 따라 no mo yimba kan she le tene pe ngujo chin ja ma ro che ne ro pe shen nang zong tong zong ji shen nang ji ya pe zu po pe ro ba jang jang re ne pa pa ro pa tum sa ta ye da se tel du ro da dong de sol mo gen chen ni ro yo ro ka ng ne sa ma ge na ka che mi yo ro che ni tene ye da de sol pe ko tene ka chung chung ni ban chao zhu guo qim ga lan chao And
so then there is those hungry spirits with the inner obscurations, and so that refers to their like physical autonomy, and so that is so their bodies are extremely emaciated, and their mouths are as small as a needle's oar, extremely tiny, and so then their throats are as small as like a bowstring, like extremely small, extremely narrow, small throat, but then their bellies are as large as like a belly, huge bellies, but so they're always hungry, but nothing ever gets into their stomach. And then their legs are the limbs, hands and legs are very like grass, like very fine, and so they can't go around and find food. And even if they find food, sometimes they can't really eat it because their mouth and their throats are too narrow. It wouldn't go through. But then their bellies are very large, so they're always hungry. And so then, because their limbs are very fine, very small, very thin, they can't really support, the body cannot support, like their legs cannot support the large belly that they have. It's too heavy. And so, for example, in this world, we can see the suffering, similar suffering among human beings. There are some really poor countries where people are completely emaciated. They are just skin and bones, and they can hardly walk. Their limbs don't support them. They're too feeble. And when we just see them, it makes us feel scared. We just see skin and bones. But then the hungry spirits are much, much worse than that, because these human beings are still human beings. So they still have like a normal mouth and throat and so on. So if they would find something to eat, they could. But the hungry spirits, even if they would find it, their throat is so small that nothing would even could even go through there. So this is the suffering that they experience due to the force of karma.
다 jirgi yada seya deita tso sama hira mara bichi kasi saya tan tungya yana kupa na lepsona teni tungya na chochu komas teni saya rana teni me mamurs dordina kupa na lepsona dona saya tungya chama me yono goda teni me na jose teni sik teni chiro goda zupo chap tsing ro was 나 작사지 사이가는 작사 나는 조금 던져로 친구를 뺏기나 이시네. 그거래 스탑하는 거는 또 따라 첫 차장 뺄 그된 저 효진 돈은 친구도 왔어. 얘나야 따라 코란서 여다 콜레도 첫 책이만 초쇼스는 뺏는 저쪽으로 초 마음에 현이 작은 너는 작매 작사매 현 과 만통하나 이. 근데 대답은 이제 좀 친구로 왔어. 얘나야 첫 보여만 레기고
So then there is also hungry spirits with like various other obscurations. So there's some who don't find any food or drink, and some, even if they find it, then once they drink it, it becomes like a molten, boiling iron that sets them ablaze. So it is like a fire entering their bellies, and their whole body turns into fire, and everything is burned. So it's when you imagine if you would drink like iron that has been molten and it's hot and burning. If you would drink that, then your body, your belly, your inside will be completely burned. Or just imagine drinking extremely hot water, it burns you. So this is how it happens for those hungry spirits. So they drink this water, but then it turns into this molten hot fiery embers or molten iron. But then due to the force of karma, they're burned, but they still don't die.
다 여다게 나는 계속이나 다 로당 같이를 대고 그래서나 물로 쳐당아 동그 론 쳐당아 동그 받대 되네 세공 동안 따주 밑에 자 투양 가버스 띠꼼지 멤버로 동안 타예서 너나 로 쳐당 론 쳐당아 동그 발라더니 다 대답더니 동안 띠도기 동안 양는 내그 요리스 코란스 체제티
Lo chita ngatong ki phala sena lo tonta chunga.
tonta chunga
So then regarding the lifespan of a hungry spirit, how long do they live? So when we count that in human years, it is said that they live for 15,000 human years, where they experience the suffering of hunger and thirst.
다 대답했더니 여다그네스 가래 제송아리스는 다 신나 조 신나 그만 제송아리스 가래스는 그 신나방 전어서 사고 여러와스 신나방 파땅 봐오만 그와 철사들이 레망봉 레니바 망보 사고 다 신나 여러와 전어사 드니 양하게 파 짐바야 땅마와 야 컨트롤라인 추파프마와 서로 답에 냠타라야 로빠 지마트베치 타는 나랑게 사마야 야부 사마다와다 신나는 신나 여러와스 대답 신나게 찡대 버더니 되게 레거더니 여다 그리는 거 요레스
I mean, so what karma causes us to be born as a hungry spirit? We are born as a hungry spirit mainly because of stinginess or greed, which is, for example, when you accumulate wealth, but then you don't want to give it away to anybody else. So that is you don't want, for example, even though you have a lot of wealth, you don't want to help others with it. You don't want to be generous, or You don't want to make offerings to the 3 jewels and so on. You don't want to help the needy. Even yourself, you don't even want to eat well and so on yourself because you don't want to let go of your wealth. You're too stingy. So then we are kind of bound up, caught up in this stinginess. Then this is what causes birth as a hungry spirit. Then there's one more kind of hungry spirit, which is the hungry spirit that kind of lives in the air.
Kakele tape nupa chimbo reng pe chadzogolo malaro pasi tabia John Chane si tabia ngarang so tara hla drip chi si teso yungu dwa jikting pa hla jikpa zin jarbo tirang te yongsu zoba de tara yada kungdo re dos teso kakele pe nupa yapo yore was
So then there is some hungry spirits, who are like those who live in the air, basically those who we call like spirits, and sometimes they have some magical powers. So these are those that we call like those demonic beings and evil spirits and so on. So these are actually all hungry spirits, or we talk about like local gods or spirits and so on, territory spirits, or spirits that live in the mountains or in the forests and the trees and so on. So these are all hungry spirits. And for example, some people, when they die, then they take on such a negative birth. And then we say that now they are an evil spirit. And so all of these are hungry spirits. And some of these spirits have some special powers. Some also have the power to help people. We call them, for example, the worldly gods. Or they are the haughty spirits, and there is the very malicious spirits, the tin, and then there is the kingly spirits, the garbo, and then there is the goblin-like spirits and so on. So there are certain kind of spirits that have special powers, but they all are hungry spirits.
Tani Koran so tapar tani jikta tang an tang Koran so shedang so mangbu yores tani ngaran so chamsa lan chu chamsa ngaran so pinto do se ya do pinto chamsa pinto yore yan chamsa nu jigir Koran so ngaran jingna pe yore Koran so la.
And so these hungry spirits, they experience a lot of fear, and due to that also they have a lot of hatred. So sometimes we know that they do help us sometimes, but sometimes also they can cause a lot of harm, and that's also mainly because they experience a lot of fear, and that creates a lot of suffering for them.
Tani ta Koran so chen de la yang Koran so tes jono lom ju yore de yin yang Koran so nu che sinjin la nu che mangbo chen de tani chew ka tani yang nye wala ji de ta tani khala ju ye ta se so yong go yores.
So there is, for example, some who in this life as people, as humans, they have some wealth and certain powers, but then also they cause a lot of harm towards sentient beings. And then after they have died, they turn into this kind of hellish existence of a hungry spirit.
Da tundro dongari tundro tela tini sengna neba te se jamsuna rocha chichon zo dan dor dina sengna neba se chola ne de tini tundro mangko yoro was chola neba tundro rola neba de so tin nam kalam pri ta tin dor dina rola neba rada tini jinzin Then Namkala sa. Tan Dodin Tundro Red Jam Rambo Euros. Then Mug Dad the Zoom with Tundro.
The next is the suffering of the animals. So there's all kinds of animals. There's the animals that live in the waters, like the oceans. And then there's animals that live on the mountains, or animals that live in the sky. For example, on the surface, there's animals like wild animals and carnivorous animals, and there's birds in the sky and so on. There's all kinds of different animals. And then there's animals that are owned by people and so on.
Drama the Chinating as Mugazon and Nisado, soon Paul Kransa, there is a thing as Dunhaman Bohako to us. Then it are Roland Nebe Tundrotas or Yasimki Chek Sahadua. That Zik Don La Sobagataya, Simji Yimba Sa. Then Dordan Chiki Chik Janjan Sahadua. Now call a neighbor Sai and a Chiki Chik Sahadua. Then it Mugata, Mambo Sagura, Simji Tambitini. Shaka cheat the Chad cheat the Rabag cheat the Ming cheat the need to log cheat and drama the Simjis Udua. Say, they say, Tundro don't have something much up your was. That is don't have Cassius. To some other Tundru don't have to tongue to Yota. Never don't have the Yadag don't have Tato, Tachi Choa Zanchi, and the Niji Chigi Yosa and the Niji inside the Asam and Ramaton had to chap some tongue to him. Thus, Tundru don't have to tongue to your was.
So then, for example, the animals that live in the waters, they all are each other's predators. So they eat each other. The bigger animals eat the smaller animals, and then even the smaller animals, they eat the bigger animals too. So they constantly are after one another and are eating each other. And so they constantly experience a lot of fear and suffering due to that. Or some animals are the prey of the humans. Humans kill them for their flesh and their blood and their skin, and then for medicine and so on, for making clothes. And so then there is animals who chase each other, like there is fish and snakes and frogs and so on that eat one another while they're still alive. Or in the mountains, the animals, they constantly live in this fear of being eaten, of being chased, being attacked by one another. For example, there is the tigers or the leopards or the bears and so on. Constantly, they are each other's prey and the predators too. And then there are also the human beings become their predators for flesh, blood, for their bones and the medicine and clothes and so on. And so in this way, they spend their lives constantly being hurt and being killed and so on. So their suffering is really incredible. And that's actually something that we can see. We can see the suffering of the animals. We can't really see the suffering of the hungry spirits and the hell beings. We can have an idea about how it must be, but we can't really see it directly. But we can see directly the suffering of the animals.
Tani te tabtini dungar se te tanyawa yeta tundrosum de dunga sigirwa ni sonsum de dunga tatel ma ni sonsum dunga sigyo tan roar josum nani ni sonsum de dunga te tabtini nyabe dunga yeda dunga to ka jir kare te tamji tini dor de no mage wa shata chibares pena nga zo de jasela ne ma songyo hindu zu ngi dunga na dikbe legend de tpeson there's a soul about the dipel naya must just say lani songwa do the ngi donga so you reverse never donga only you reverse Yadag don't hang on yours, money yours. Chilank lay Maggiva say, I will not you Maggiva at the time in, they don't have the thing yours does.
So these are the sufferings of what we call the sufferings of the three lower realms of the hells, the hungry spirits, and the animals. And so the cause for all of this suffering is all of our non-virtues, our negative actions. In the 37 Bodhisattva practices, it says that the unbearable suffering of, so the Buddha had taught that the unbearable suffering of the lower realms is the cause of wrongdoing, and to therefore never commit any wrong, never committing any wrong, even at the cost of one's life, is the Bodhisattva's practice. So when we think about, like when we speak about the suffering of the hell realms, does it really exist? Are there really hungry spirits? They really do exist. There really is such suffering. And it is experienced when one commits wrong action and does not purify it. Then one will experience such suffering.
Ngondro che soina, tini Ngondro che jakare, che jo maranzo tara tumuk se mahipadwa, le jumde mahi, conjo songe, tini tozoke pinyon, give pinyon, conjo songe yung tin ha mawachi, megewa drabiana, tegi nipa ha mawata, tena tumu labor. Tumuk, tini you the tumuk gone le sana, le chimbosana, tini Ngondro che no yores. Tapen Ngondro che soina. Ngondro chik Ngondro ying su ju su ya tubia dan do din so so ke be hyuen na tu tang yo ro s Ngondro lan do din te ta btini nga sa ji ma cha pa yo re s te en du ni be so so ke Ngondro lan ji sa re we nga ta ko Ngondro lan nga ji en sa re we ro Ngondro ji ya ke je tu mo re se ke do as tu mo ka re o len de ha ma wa chi ro Ngondro ha ma so de ni le jim je song ma hin ni te le ni Ngondro ji he do as o te ni nga te se len de ha ko ya chi tes obyons rewa lemde la balance ke do sam tini to chine so so tini jawa tang res so la pa bia dikpale sin do so la pa bia tini mage ba ma trap samba yin no ma chi samba tini tende sam go res
So then, what is the cause of being born as an animal? It is ignorance or kind of unknowingness. It is not to know about karma, not to trust in karma, not to really understand the qualities of the three jewels, not to understand the benefits of virtuous actions, and not to understand the faults of negative actions. So this lack of understanding, of knowing, is ignorance or delusion. And if one's ignorance is very strong, then one takes birth as an animal. And then as an animal, as we said, you experience the suffering of being preyed upon by others, being killed and being cut, and so on. So the suffering of the animals is incredible. So then we should take a look at ourselves and really ask myself, how likely is it that I will be born as an animal? When I look at myself, there is ignorance, right? So that's what we call ignorance. That's what we're talking about. It's this ignorance in my own mind. It's, for example, it means not to understand karma, really, and not to follow karma, even if you understand it. So this is how I'm taking birth as an animal. So therefore, when you see that in yourself, then also remind yourself, so now I have to learn about it. I have to study about karma. I have to understand karma, and then I have to follow it. Do what I should do and give up what I should not do. So I must change my mind in this way. As it is said, do not commit any wrong, even at the cost of your life. So then you should think that I'm not going to do any more wrong. I'm not going to harm others and so on.
토리스는 연안에 담보 뭐에 동하 세야지. 뭐에 동하 tellatang 알아서 뭐에 리티 톰네 존데더니 나랑서 따라 제가나 지금 동하 이때 열에 정말 제부 동하 개부 동하 나부 동하 추부 동하 제가나 시 동하 세야지. 정말 열에스 끼니 존데.
So then next we come to the suffering of the three higher realms, of which the first one is the suffering of the human beings. And the human beings, even though we have found the precious human body, we all experience the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. So once we are born, anyone who is born goes through these kinds of sufferings.
다 제부 동할 가르치 제발 동하 요시 상고요. 아무 두고나 루루스 니데 상고요. 대 말이지 동하 휴 요르시. 아무 두고나 유데 바카르 드딘 초라 빼 동하 요르시. 가르시나 빼나 나랑서 빼 나콩다 쪼바 잡동다 나나 찌여바나 이 동하 요르시. 아마 그 사와 참 사마 차오스나 책 맥 치와나시. 그러와 장모스는 되니 첫 장모는 판소나시.
So what's the suffering of birth? So you might think that there's not too much suffering. What's the suffering? Because as long as I'm in my mom's womb, it's nice and cozy there. I'm kind of lying around, relaxing in my mother's womb. But actually, it's not quite like that. There's actually a lot of suffering all the time. So first of all, it's just like being stuck in a kind of a small enclosure all the time. And then whatever the mother does affects you. For example, when the mother eats really hot food and it burns you, or when she eats some cold food or drinks cold, then it's like being thrown into icy water. So there's constant suffering in the womb.
Teni adon pen tugon ane teni maake kupan ane teni ngake make ka na amcho buga tamji don de pe janji zon pugne make puana yidunga teni yinla tamji ma don de pe ma ko ne top de bana teni dunga yu something nga donan tan songo yores nganjung donan dunga mi ba maris teni ma che yong ka dunga tina yores dawa golo lulu sen ni ku de maris.
So when you're in your mother's womb, then so when the body starts to grow, it is said that when it's explained in the sutras also that when the different body parts become prominent, like the eyes form and the ears and so on, and the limbs start to take shape, when they start to become prominent, it's like being like pricked or pierced, like having your eyes kind of poked out and so on. So it's extremely painful. So it's not like there is no suffering in the womb. It's not like for 9 months you can just like kind of rest and sleep and like sleep in this cozy place. It's not at all like that. There's a lot of suffering.
Tini ma gain ta nga la ya lo yun ndo tini gain di tambo nga ge yungri nga gain do sam shu na do do ge gri sam ro tini ma gain go cha yo wa yin na ta te tini na ji sa ji mong bo yore ro me ke ya pon thong go ma na wa ke ya po ko yo ma ka la ya po yo ma ro tini ta nga ge yo nga rang yo ya tu yo ma tini mo gen thong chong he yo re ro do na tini ge po do ha sa ji ma che po yo re.
So then later when we are born and we grow old and then we suffer from aging. So first when we just start to age, then we are starting to not be young anymore, and we feel very like negative about it, and we feel, oh no, I'm getting old, and we are afraid of getting old. And then when we actually are old, then our body declines, and we don't hear much anymore, and we can't see so clearly, and we become a little bit hunchbacked, and then we can't really help ourselves, and then other people look down on us. So the suffering of aging is really incredible.
Tene ta nabat donga se tene na yona ta donga shuwe yorwa. Tene pena ta ne nasa takbo ndo po yongwa yin dambo ma po honi nga so namjuni simtando nga na yongri samne rwa shuwe zabzab chigi yorwa rwa zabzab chena ya nima je naga doa se na yongwa kabla tene pe kake pe nasa chimbo na tene shakti togo ya lasu bata so yongwa doa se tadong masha nongo se rwa se tene pe nga la sama yo na sama chowa rwa sama nda sa chogo mari 동야 던통 저기 던통 저기 말이서 쉬위지 천지 요래 미 딱벌 사고 요래 잡자 쉬위지 건도 드는 나 영어 깔라더니 지 요래 차나 요래 제조 동화 사지 마차 요래 셈바지 보요 말이 그래서 나는 전에 상만티 동화 요래 와스 다는 미행은 로성야 또 그래 다미 요보 요모 자니라고 요 자니라고 넌 까블시 비어와스 라나 까블레 요바 예나 까블레 요바 나말 까블레 데바 성을 까블레 테기르와스
And then there's a suffering of sickness. Then we get sick, and we get sick in all the time. There's so many sicknesses we experience, and so then even before we are sick, even when we are not sick, we already suffer from it, because then we worry about, what if I get sick? I'm going to get sick. And so because of that, we are very careful about everything. And so then one day we actually do get sick, and so then we have to do a surgery, and so then sometimes if we, even though there's so much suffering, and we are sick and we had a surgery, we're still kind of good off because we didn't die yet. But then we have to be so careful. Everything changes. We can't eat this or that, and we can't drink this or that. And then we always have to take medicine. We have to be really careful about everything we do. And so because of that, suffering in our mind also is incredible. Also in our bodies, of course, we go through a lot of pain and discomfort. So there's a lot of suffering. And then also it extends to other things, like it's very expensive. We have to pay for it. And then it's often we find nobody to help us. And so it creates a lot of difficulty for ourselves and also for others, like our family members and so on. So all around, it creates a lot of suffering. And so then when the doctor tells you you have a terrible disease, when you hear that, you feel afraid. And so not only are you sick in your body, but also you experience so much fear in your mind. And then if the doctor tells you you can't cure it, it's terminal, then you go through so much fear and suffering, not just in your body, but also in your mind. And so then you begin to worry, what am I going to do? And then you try to find any kind of method, anything to help. For example, even if you're really rich and you can afford anything, you might think that I have so much money, I can just pay for any kind of treatment. You might think that, but still, when the doctor tells you, sorry, there's nothing I can do for you, how much suffering, how much fear do you experience?
Tan dona tani pe na yong yin tan donga chen tra chung sun tan dona shui yo was na dongas.
So in brief, when you're sick, you experience all kinds of suffering, like sometimes more, sometimes less, but the suffering is generally very intense.
An chub donga se ta shui yo was tan ha so tapar chigri sam shegi yo was. Ta donga tamchen chia tin chub donga re. Jega na chu donga tin chub donga chi shu re. Chöngdu ngana zota chöb zezok hibi jago yoro zok hibi jago yoro tan chöngde dangbon chögri san shenang nganja chöb kabla donga chimbo teni chötsade teni leji jisin rang teni donga sanji ma chapa yoro was.
And then there is the suffering of death. And we're always afraid of death. Actually, of those four kinds of suffering, the worst that we dread the most is the suffering of death. Everyone is afraid of dying. And then dying itself involves a lot of pain. It's not easy to die. And so first, before we die, we are afraid of death. And then when we die, it's a lot of pain, we suffer. And also after we have died, we continue to suffer as we follow our karma.
Tene namju jumbar tene ngana zota dor dina donga hibi yore roha tapare shi nyamare re donga chapa pa na yore da ngana rewa hibi yore semna rewa hibi yore rewa na yin drum marba ro te an donga re topa hibi yore da ndo yungore ndale cha lore sa topa hibi yore tela donga hibi yore redo donga hibi yore so topo trom nama to sol pen champo ma cha donga yore ro sawa drupsa leka lana mandro donga yore ta donga mabu duas ngara sam ta donga gangde yor ta dewa chung chi yor ta namju donga chata res.
So you can see we always experience so much suffering, really all the time. Each and every day, we constantly suffer. Actually, it's falling on us. All of these problems and our suffering is like rain falling down all the time. And for example, there's so many things that we want to have. We have so many hopes, but then we never accomplish that. And so when we suffer, and there's so much fear that we suffer, we are wondering that this is what's going to happen. What if something is going to happen? Something bad will happen. So all the time, really, we are caught up in so much hopes and fears in our life, and also we are sad when, for example, our friends or we don't get along with our friends or with our family members, or when we are not successful in whatever activity. If you really think about it, our lives are really filled with suffering, and there's really just very, very little happiness at all. So for the most part, we always experience just suffering.
Chapan diziji donga se ke do jubru donga je donga jubru donga pe donga rwas pe ngara jubru donga se ngara jubru donga yore sigal changmal chapan diziji donga den roa ro le yores ta pe nan jubru donga hie ne ngaso manda wo ji cha ya nan jubru donga hie yo yin na o ta tre ngara zupo pe dewo ro ji yo na ro zupo pe dewo yo na ro zupo dewo yo na ko dewa re do as ताते लामसा पेना मोटा रो दुंगा जाव यो ना ता ता देवा के छम दुंगा जो छान था दुंगा रे था जुब दुंगा जरी था किछि चिलन जो सवा यान जुबो देव ना लोवर द जुबो जीन रो जब छि सामान रो छि सा सामान ते पे मांटु छि नाछा लन जो ना या खुन जुब दुंगा रे दोस पेना छोंग रो सावा लाम रो ना यान लोवर तीन जिजिन छि के छोंग सावा लाम मांटो बा ना ता या दुंगा रे jiba dunga chata. Yungo, sum sema yungo yores.
So we speak about 3 kinds of suffering that sentient beings experience. So it is the suffering upon suffering, the suffering of change, and the all-pervasive suffering. And so as human beings, we mainly go through this suffering of change. So we suffer so much from change, don't we? All the time. We all have it. And the 6 realms of samsara collectively, all the beings experience this all-pervasive suffering, but the suffering of change is very particular to the human beings. For example, as a human being, now today, for example, you're feeling really well. You feel that I'm happy today. And so then something happens suddenly. For example, you have a car accident. And then all of that happiness has completely changed into suffering. So it changes momentarily. So in one moment you're well and healthy, the next moment suddenly you are in a lot of pain. For example, you eat something and you get really sick. So it turns into suffering. Everything always changes into suffering. Or you're successful in your business and then suddenly something happens, a condition arises and you lose everything. So everything becomes suffering. And so this is really how things actually are. We can see it in our lives.
Yang yingin go ko tan kabisi ne hyoson ta ta dunga khal dunga ri do as pen so so chi ama do zhong yong wa yin na ama de zhong sa de so so bu de ne ba chan min kan be zap chin bo na min kan ro go ya do chan tin ju bu dunga as do de no kho wa ko de ta ba tin dunga nan de de yo res tren tes de o na sa ni ma tin de sin ko de do ga nan dunga ga chu ne tin de de yo res tan do no.
And so we experience also suffering upon suffering, which is like one thing goes wrong, then something else goes wrong too. For example, your business goes down. So first you're successful and then your business suddenly goes down. So there's a change, but then on top of that, maybe somebody steals your wealth, and then somebody comes and cheats you or deceives you and takes your wealth. Or like, for example, your mother has died and then suddenly your child is getting sick on top of that and you have to go to the hospital and so on. So there's this constant suffering upon suffering and suffering of change. And so this is how it is in samsara. There we are caught, completely caught up in suffering all the time. We don't really find any happiness in samsara. So this is how it is. We constantly kind of caught up in suffering.
Tani tan dona te ta tini mal dunga mangbo yeres tini cha yongwa kala ta so so ge jono so so ge namin chang la ni ngaran chi pon ro yo bas ta to so le pe nga kable ma se del kable hwi jab sa ge jono ta tani so so ge zebe tini nama to so la ni ta dunga sa ji ma cha be yeres ya so so ge nama de te jong so wa na te ta ba ya dunga yo bas dona dunga ri do sam ta ya se na ko muli dal da de chi kare do srewa 간단한 컨셉을 안 이리도스 네트워크도 왔어. 너르드나 코동하는 로야 이바 타추사도 왔어. 대인데 다고 첸들라야 힘받게서 강야 문도스. 대답단 너르드나 먹을 동하트 가와는 연구 열서는 두차 왕글레사 야발틴 되니 다른 먹을 때는 동하 링라면 되어레스. Penam may lu tobet the monsunam devayune malit lang yurete yena yan du chagun lesa yabawan tine tiningagitara 또 제가나 지금 동아도 요래스 뭐 동아도 요래스
So there is so much suffering that we experience as human beings, and especially when we die, then everything that we've had accumulated in this life, everything is left behind. All the money and the wealth and the people that we love, our family members and so on, we have to leave them all behind and go on alone. And everything we have worked for so hard in this life will be left behind. And there is so much suffering that comes along with that. And then also the other way, when somebody else dies, somebody that we love then dies, then we suffer so much too. So if you think about it, really, is there any happiness in this life as a human being? Even though we have a precious human body, we don't really find happiness. And even if we think that we do, it will never stay. It will always change, and we always lose it. So that's the nature of it. It's already decided, actually, since we are in this existence, it is going to happen. We are going to lose it, and everything is always going to change. So there isn't really anything in this life to really be attached to. Everything is really causing a lot of suffering. And so mainly the reason why we experience the suffering that we do as human beings is mainly because of desire or attachment, the karma accumulated with desire. And that leads to the various kinds of suffering as a human being. So even though as a result of past marriage, we have found a precious human body, but still, due to the karma of desire in this life, we are now bound to experience the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and so on, and all the different many sufferings of the human beings.
나도 가래따사 요르스나 다 물리 톱되요. 물리 더 톱되 번데기 때문에 다 담배 취지 맞아봐이나. 치워가라 콜레 나랑 준호롬비 침보 간디지 이나야. 강양아 차례인 거요 말이. 나랑 좀남 번지보 간디지 이나 강양아 차례인 거요 말이. 나랑 협정 침보 간디지 이나 강양아 차례인 거요 말이. 나 차를 가래인 거지. 레 렌데티 코나인 거다. 치랑게 레 기와사요는 대인데버 수남인 거요. 치랑게 레 머게와사야요는 린들라 대근데버티니 야고 머게와티 차례인 거요. 마도 이마 강양인 거요 말이. 대인도 다 담조 준비를 토반데 되니 물리 똥로 맞아야 되니 담배 추주 그래스.
So now we have found a precious human body, and now having found the precious human body, we have to use it in a meaningful way and to practice the Dharma. Because if we, having found this precious human body, if we don't practice the Dharma, then when we die, then we will leave it all behind, and then we follow our karma. And then it doesn't matter how much money or wealth you have accumulated, or doesn't matter how beautiful you are, it doesn't matter how educated you are and so on. None of it will follow you. You can't take any of it with you. The only thing that you take with you is your karma, and that's the only thing. And so if your karma is positive, then you bring with you merit. And if the karma is negative, then you bring with you non-virtue. And that's the only thing that will come with you. Nothing else will go. So therefore, it's really essential that we don't waste our life, our precious life, but that we use it to practice the true Dharma.
Oh yeah. Lamai ridwa. Rudogana lamai. Tene lama yinje tene lutomnes lama yinje ta lama yin le dma kare yore senas. Chirang hun ji sunam chimbele tene lama yin chirang lutop yores. Yina ya hun ji chirang chado mangbo seye ba tegen level tene tege jung yorwa. Yunga jim tonsi ba di jung tege tene la yang chado chiyoda. Lama yin korang la deji yapo yore. Deji yapo yore te yina ya teke matsama chene korang soko la ge deji de kozun tong tubu yoda. Like the Jim Pussum so one tone, then it then chado gene, then chado gene, tapa, tuba jama jacuta. Tapa majan tuba jago, the leg wange, in leg wange, then it's like to go. Then it's like in soon that Jatan that and don't last about the mambo unit. Then it lama, then mambo may say that tender, Jin lama in the tapan tuba jan, then you res.
And then there is the suffering of the demigods or the jealous gods. And so what is their suffering? Is that so actually due to some merit accumulated in the past, they are born in the form of a demigod, which is actually a positive birth, where they do experience well-being, but also they bring with them this continuum of a lot of jealousy. So they experience an experience that is similar to the cause, which is the cause is jealousy. So the demigods are extremely jealous. They're jealous because they can see the gods. So actually the jealous gods or the demigods, they actually do experience a good amount of well-being and happiness, but they're not content by it because they can see the even more perfect happiness and the bliss of the gods. And when they see that, they are very jealous. And so therefore, they are always kind of getting ready to battle the gods, to fight them. So they're always a fighting and trying to bring down the gods. But due to the force of karma, they can't defeat the gods. The gods are stronger. So then when they go to battle with the gods, then the gods send down their weapons, though their knives and so forth, and their arrows and their weapons, and then the jealous gods will be defeated. So even though they try to attack them, but they never win.
Ta lama yin la kare ge je yo de sena ta kon cha do wang ge tni chen do le nga chen do le nga nam yu ge wang ya sa ro le jim de si nga su ge wa sa yo ro sa ge wa mang bo sa te ge su nam chim be yo de lama yin le top yin ne yas de nam yu nga su pe chik chen cha do si ro cha do mang bo ji ge do cha do mang bo ji ji la ta pe so so to bo ba la to mo ba la tene so so punchi nama parula dona nga sun chado mangu jendo de te ke ta nga ki lama yin lulin de tene tin chado wang yin an de semji ne tene chupa ja ne tene donga mangu nyu yo res tene chado do de na nga ta de sam tang go ta o nyarwa se ya de donga sam ji ma cha pa ri do ki wa jo ka ri o she dang ri do 오 여다스에 동화 사지 맞춰 버리도 가래리도 지 세나리도 왔어 오다 든로서야 돼 삼로다 동화 쉬도 왔어 어쩌 가래 또 먹이도 왔어 다 라마인데 동화 사지 맞춰 버렸다 콜 사양 통야 동화 요마데 얘는 차도 동화 되니 주바자 되니 방으로 주보 매거는 송차자로 때 동화 사지 맞춰 버려 좀 버지 때 세질 되는 거 어딘 차도 돼 요데 세질 좀 봐야 되거든 니마질 되어서 돼 투고요 너나 콘 차도 왕 어떤 너드나 당 나랑 그 장엄마 들어 당 나랑 그 장엄마 나랑 먹었을 강에 리면도 그래봐 나는 누티니도 좀 내고는 나 자리면도 그래봐 장엄마 가래 장엄마 나기 주래 요데부터 shedan tan chadon de so ne jang ma de so ri do senan de so ta ri do se ta nga no ma de gi do sta ni so na nga ma phen do ni de so ri do sa de nga ka ha ko de ha ko ne de ni ta nga ka pa lang se de ni ji ko wa se give pin hi de bu ni me hi se ya de de ni yo ka ta give pin hi se na o de chin chin bu yu de pa de 다른 걸 대지 강요 봐. 참아 개와기 피우리도 사면. 다 대는 대하고는 개 피우하고. 딕비 님의 시세데. 당알 따라 동아도 강이 망보 노아스 마데와 마치 망보 노아. 로? 너 참아 가와네 용도. That's some money gonna ta Makiwa Corani Jondi Doas. There like Hako Yona, oh, Tangone, Nagatis legend Hakota. Any legend Hako, then Nagate Pananchi was.
So now when we whatever suffering that the demigods experience, it comes once they're born there. It comes from a mind of jealousy, and so how that comes about, how we take birth in such a place, you can see in our lives now. So, for example, we might understand karma and we might do good things, we virtues, we might have some merit and experience some well-being in our lives. But then also we're always jealous at each other. So if you're always jealous and really competitive, for example, between friends or family members, then this is what causes birth as a demigod. Now, then, like one thing leads to another. So you're very jealous, and then because of jealousy, you become competitive, and then because of competitiveness, you become like belligerent, and you always fight, you always argue, and so on. And then as a result, you always suffer. So really think about, if you really think about it for yourself, your own mind, your own jealousy, and so on, how it arises in your own mind, and all of what we have discussed. So, for example, we say that, oh, hell, there's so much suffering. But then what's the cause of it? The cause is one's own anger, the hatred. Or we think that, oh, there's so much suffering in the hungry spirit realm. It's terrible. But what's the cause of that? It's my own stinginess, my greed. And we say that there is so much suffering and that the animals experience. But what's the cause of that? It's ignorance. And when we say there's so much suffering that the demigods experience, then why is that? It's because of jealousy. So the demigods, the jealous gods, actually, they have no real difficulty. So they have enough food, have enough drink. They don't really have so much difficulty, but what torments them is their jealousy. And they experience it all the time. So constantly they are at war and they are fighting the gods, but then the gods shower down their weapons, and then that injures the demigods, and then they suffer from injury, and then they suffer from their jealousy, their constant fighting and warfare. Actually, they do not have spent a single day in their lives where they are just happy and at peace. Never, because they're always jealous. And so that's our real enemy. My real enemy is not that person that I don't like. My real enemy is not the person who hurts me and who harms me. That's not my real enemy. My real enemy is my own hatred, my own jealousy. That's the one who is really harming me. That's the one who is dragging me down into the three lower realms. So that's important to understand. And then understanding that, then you will do what should be done and give up what should be given up. So this is really what we mean with understanding the benefits of virtue and understanding the shortcomings of non-virtue. So it means that when you experience happiness, then you recognize this is because of virtue. This is the benefit of virtue. If you know that, then you know the benefit of virtue. And regarding knowing the shortcomings of non-virtue, if you experience suffering, you recognize that all of my problems, all of my suffering, why am I experiencing that? It's because of my negative actions only. So that's, if you know that, then you have really understood the shortcomings of negative actions. Then you have really understood karma. And then understanding karma, then I know what to do and what not to do.
Talai donganes, tane talak lu ngana talak lu langsung cipo yuri sanggu yuri was samak. Ri cipo yuris, mug law dance and the Molo don't have here the Koran of a set of cheering bull was. Lala Jetan cheering from Mangoyores. Don't let someone like the Kim Pusum Sobayerta. The Kim Pusum Soba, the Kim Pusum Soba, you but tell it in it, then it costs a giver, Dugoyama, Dipa Pankoyama is. Then it tell a Dekitella, Sem Yang, Sem Chane. Then it thing Nendo the Tin, Nam Jelata Korans of legend ever says in under Che Zone, Che Zone the Ta. Nyama doon tini korang cher yu pa tini data yung ta china shama doon san chugri da tini chibete chare yung res chibete chan de tini ta korang ka namju chala pichu tang do yo ba do lo tang khang ba din las pa tini chamang ni ba tro ta me to yin chung wa ta su ning ba chang yo ta chama tro namju ten ri yung go ma tini ten chibete yin ha ko de yin tini Tate Korang Lak Yama Dun la was like Yama Dun. That like Yama Dun la Nans Muglo dancing, Molo Sumjaris, Molo Muglo Sumjala. That Korang Data within Dunganya word. Kare Dunganyo, that data within the tomato metoning by chand, that Korang get the name Pama Punchi, Topo Tomo, like Topo Tomo, Tamakako you. That Cots are sitting in Worma, that tomato. Tangan pe gane ne pa thap cho shu ji xena zao ji le no mo yin ban ning ji mi na tani za lu ma re de khang gam ro tu lu ro pha se ne o pe de na yi se ne tani ro tu lu ta zhong bo zhong chang ma ta khang ka la go ta chi na mo lu le je ne tani ge wa du ne yang hla yo le ya sho la bu ta de zang la ne tani chang ma lu wo de khang dong ha shu yo re ta de ka de 처와긴 치대 혈도 하지 소소고 조보 조모 탐지기 요로 쓰지 야지요 마다 대동한 일이도 동하선 봐 코란 찌왔으면 가와지 해도 하거다 찌왔으면 답변은 네 송그 든로를 째오는 먹을 째오는 야와지 정말 코란 하고 근데 동하시요 요로다 대답은 잘 동하 뭐 보여레스 다 담보 코란 라이그 리토야테 다 기와소나 망부사 되네 얘네야 그냥 나절 왕게더니 라이블람 데데더니 남실더니 날 라큰 포동게 동화 시대 동화 상지 맞아 보여레스 대답더니 너는 좋아 저 가와지나 동화 라이레스
And then there's the suffering of the gods, and so the gods, we think that the gods only experience bliss and happiness. And yes, that they do experience only bliss and happiness for a very long time. We call them long-lived gods. They have different lifespans, but they live approximately a few thousand years in human years. So they have this perfect happiness, experience perfect happiness. But then, so because of that, because of being distracted by all this bliss and all these pleasures, they never practice virtue, and they also do not give up non-virtue. They're completely distracted, carried away by the attachment to their various desires. And so one day, then their karma will come to an end. So their life is coming to an end. And there are basically 7 God days in that death process. So in those 7 days, 7 God days before they die, there is this voice that appears that tells them you're going to die, and then there are various signs of death that begin to arise. So for example, normally the things that they were using, like their houses and their seat and their clothing and their flower garlands and so on, all become filthy and wither and smelly. And so normally that's not the case. So then when that happens, it becomes a sign that death is approaching. And so those 7 God days in human years, it's 300 human years. So for this time, they experience incredible suffering. So it starts with their clothes and their flower garlands to wither, and then their body becomes smelly, and then all of their companions, their parents and their friends, they all abandon them, nobody wants to come close to them because they're really smelly. It's almost like if you get sick with a really terrible contagious disease, then imagine if you have a very terrible disease, a very kind of filthy disease, and people around you have no compassion, then people around you without any compassion, they wouldn't stay anywhere close to you. They would just go as far away from you as possible. They would just run away from you. So that's just exactly how it is as for a God. At that time, when everything falls apart, then all of these friends completely abandon them without any much compassion for them. They completely leave them behind. They're just too disgusted by them. And so then they are left behind. And then they do leave them with some prayers and say that, so may you be born in the human realm, and then may you then again come back here to the God realm. But with that, they just abandon that God. And so then the God experiences the suffering of that change, all of his friends and companions just abandoning him, and then all of his body and garlands and clothes, everything withers and falls apart, and nobody cares. And then on top of that, the gods also can see their future birth, where they will take birth again. So, for example, whether it's in a hell being or as an animal or a ghost or human beings, wherever they are born, they can see that. And seeing birth in the lower realms causes them intense fear and suffering. So the gods have first gained this body because they have accumulated a lot of virtue, a lot of merit, but also they are very prideful. And so therefore they have neglected any practice. And so one day when it all falls apart, the gods experience the suffering of change and falling into lower rebirths. And that causes them really unimaginable suffering. So these are the kinds of sufferings that we experience in the 6 realms of samsara. Wherever we are, there really is only suffering.
Dona ngagitsur ngag same thing same samnotan samnotan tan roar ro kawa devado one samnotan deva khaya manduas donga jirangiri duas ko nekap deva yuna kon jurino jurangiri duas tapa manduas pen hlag dekin pasum chopa thomna ya lok tongsa khaki dege duas yena ya ko tapa dege manduas jondu duas donga ri duas non samno kawa tama yena ya roar don ka kiwanya ko dunga jirangi dunga mbahi mato mandos karsin dunga sum gunang chabdiro ko dunga sum no ne de yorwas chi lobo unda mangon sami mato ko dunga kana de tene ko hanchu mato dunga nyung yorwas tene samno tana ta ngune hena chi yare sta mala re besong yorwa rodung ko dunga de samna hinglong tapo nang rồi người sao mà tao này tao ngone ko nga kita ko dungan de ngone ko an de kareli de chik tapje se sam tao ta khiana chaworis ta zuma tu dunga ninglong dang ro ya ti dunga tu ha ko ta ndin nan de ro man chu ma to yong go yor was sam ne ninglong ta ko dang ta kare chi tan do na ta nga na ke tamju jumbil ro bo chi top de yor was ta ti ti ne de ngene ge wa chi du ko ta 다다랑 누구를 마도 콤마다 브랑기리 도와스 tendra samno tane ta ngana 가장 공등 ngana 디 로도 넘버 years here 요로 담존니 바까와 삼바 마타바 삼바 레좀좀 코비님이 따도 야고 하고 드닝하게 당원에 저 셈나다 셈출은 되고다 셈출은 되네 다 ngana 드니 다 저도글로 문로데 네 사포임바 다 디데니 드니 출을 셈데 출은 데데 만데데 다 치나 로도 남기 하고 마오 디덴 레고 거다 로도 남기 야고 하고 나랑 밀린데 학경 그 자침버린도 쌈 로아 린탕 침버리도 예나야 마타바리도 쌈 개발 걸 마치거다 데독 탐치 레줌데 코나리도 사 레줌데 야고 숨고 어, 코만도 동하라기도 tel hincha시다 지요 말이. 호텔에 뛰는 담 코알로도 세고에 좀 지대리다. 디티니 티니 나타 담배 추드야 마에 다 gond로 세. 티니 추드야 당네 랑갈레고 요레스 텔로도 남이야 하고서나 텐데 기침보 쳐고 요레스. 다 로도 남이때 마 곰네 냠니시인디 고름데 쳤나나 다랑나서 담보 밀리톱 니 퍼카와티니 마타바 코랑 고름 치나 간레지 삼타는 리게 로 가레 탑데도 테곰 치나 마타바랑 곰나 야보던 테곰 레짐데 스틱볼 삼타나 야보던 테삼타 ndiko yores ndona koala hincha chungro sem chudan rego lodon nami donda de
So in brief, we have to really think about it. Where in the 6 realms can we find any happiness? If you really think about it, we can really understand that we can't find any happiness, no matter where we go in the 6 realms. It's all suffering. And even if we experience some temporary happiness, it will always change. Nothing will stay. So even though the gods may experience perfect happiness for thousands of years, it will also change. It will not stay. And in the end, they experience a lot of suffering. So wherever we go, we suffering. And so we experience the suffering and the suffering of change and the all-pervasive suffering. And it is just maybe temporarily, for the time being, maybe it's not so apparent, maybe it's not really manifest, but actually it's just a question of time. Sooner or later, we will find ourselves in a lot of suffering again. So if we really think about it, it is actually quite frightening. This really terrifying. Milarepa had said, therefore he said that when I think about the suffering of the 6 realms of samsara, I'm struck with like intense like heart pain, intense suffering, intense sadness. So when we really think about it, then we can see that really it is quite like terrifying. It's quite heartbreaking actually when we think about all the suffering. So then what should I do? So now I have found the precious human body. So therefore I must practice the Dharma, I must practice virtue. And I must practice it right now because life is impermanent. So this is how we think about those 4 thoughts that turn the mind. If you really understand the difficulty of finding a precious human body and the impermanence of this life and karma, cause and effect, and the suffering of samsara, then this is really how you really intermingle your mind with the Dharma. And so that's why those preliminaries are actually extremely profound. And so whether or not your mind is mingled with the Dharma, you can really see by seeing whether or not you have really understood the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. If you really have understood them, then you will think that now I have a precious human body and it's extremely precious, but also it's impermanent. So that encourages you to practice the Dharma. And then when you know that everything, happiness and suffering, is the result of my own actions, then you will observe karma. And when you know that samsara is suffering by nature, then you will not be so attached to the pleasures of samsara. So you're turning your mind away from samsara once and for all. And finally, you're actually entering the Dharma and you're going through the open door of Dharma practice. So that's when you finally have actually arrived on the path. It is really through understanding the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. And then how you practice them, it's up to you, whatever works best for you in terms of the order. So if it comes, like if you feel more inspired by reflecting on impermanence, for example, then that you can just focus on that more. Or if you like to think about karma, then you can think about that and so on. So, but in brief, what must be accomplished is that we have to eliminate our clinging attachment to this samsaric existence, and we have to kind of mix our mind with the Dharma. That's the whole purpose of the four thoughts that turn the mind.
다 남주 나랑 다 로도 남이 되는 라파드 따라 코브 동하 간데인 바도 다 삼론단 소소 냠니시 인디 되니 나랑스티 몬로 산초 랍자노나 지데 소도아스 코브는데 가르기 전 데오고가 많지베 시브델라 마다바 냥인데 벨람란조세 단디 직동델라 삼론땅나 고레 라오 삼론 대승하기 시야 삼론 돈투비여레스 코브는데 당 시방 감성코 가와기바이나야 콜레 대와 가야 만도스 대와 끼직 자면 만도스 대고고가 많지베 대인도 나서다 시브델라 마차바스디 제네갑 대와 찍텔라 가서 척과 맞지 시거다 그래서 대한 동화지라기리도스 내가 대한데 동화지라기리도스 대인도 코바나는 가와기나 핀토면도 대와면도 대인도 되는 나한테 코발레 탑 냥인데 별람라 중국도스 단 돈을 산지 컴파토에 지구도 싸면 들이 텔을 싸면 땅으로 가르치는 코와데 동하지랑 길이들세나 코와데 저 가완 줄도 저 레뉴모 코는 좀 요래 코와 족세도 로아 르룩세 다라 저르도와 저르르 땅도 뇨모 저 코나리도 뇨모 저 코나 인서 텔 대와지 가와토에 대인데 저 코나야 먹여버리라 제부 코야 동하레스 대인데 되는 나한테 내가 지 대와다 저를 힘받다 척밤에 지네 되니 말아서다 코와네 탑을 되니 매고레스 다 돈다 되레스 되니 드랭게 춘삼드나 현주바인 되니 다다동 까마 종아서 좋아지는 시기 다때서 소리도 공감이 받지 가에서 뒤속에 나가면 돼 되니 정말 공수 시기 되니야 지난번에 양수솔레 간도 딜라유나 되니 민소는 로는 되기 저와랑에 링 까마 종아서 자기 되니 넘버서 되서 로는 되기도 서
So in terms of how we actually then reflect on and practice those four thoughts that turn the mind, so in the sadhana, in our Ngondro sadhana, the excellent path to enlightenment. So we're on page 19. For the last point, it says, wherever in samsara one is born, true well-being cannot be found. I shall therefore turn away from worldly pleasures and enter the path of nirvana. So actually, if we just read this verse, it's very easy to understand something you can really think about. Anyone can think about it, something that's easy to practice. So when you read this verse and then you reflect, no matter where I'm born in samsara, I won't find any happiness there, not even for a moment. So therefore I must make an effort to free myself from samsara and to attain a state of nirvana, the state of enlightenment. And then why am I experiencing suffering all the time? There is a cause, and the cause are the afflictive emotions, the 6 afflictions leading to birth in the 6 realms of samsara. So all suffering comes from that, the afflictive emotions. And then how do I find happiness? So you reflect in this way, thinking about the causes and the results of suffering and also of happiness. And so when you see that, then you will not be attached too much to, you will think that there's not much point in being so attached to all this temporary bliss or temporary pleasures of this life. What's important is that I make an effort in freeing myself from samsara altogether. So this is how you should think. And so for today, we stop the teachings here. I will answer some questions for 15 minutes. Sorry, we are a little bit late. There was just not enough time. So if you have something else to do, if you have to go to work and so on, then you can leave if you wish. You can rest now. But for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to answer a few questions.
Okay, so we have quite a fair bit of questions accumulated from the last few sessions. So I will start to ask them in sequence. Okay, so the first question is, I read in the commentary text of the 37 Bodhisattvas practices, and there is this verse that says, our bodies become radiant light. Our lifespan, merit, and qualities increase. But Rinpoche said that lifespan cannot be increased. Could you please explain on this point?
Ingere gasalale nalatini give it opogola sungesara give it op ana ti kara ti sungere ti penna ti give it opoda which tisnotini teni sonam teni che chama pendo yoris 저런 제 손함 되게 sama pendo yoris nina yang kerang kisonatini che di che yoraba teni che di che yoraba teni pendo yomara teni dikarare
Kawando tagol sempre zendo he.
does it say that which word Shu?
Yeah.
Which number, which wait a minute.
I'm sorry.
37.
Yeah, it wasn't.
The 37
stated.
practices.
Yeah, it's one of the.
It doesn't say
verse.
which one.
It didn't say which one. Yeah.
Does it say about the life?
Yunti yang datam perjechin, the yunti pergiri, the temporary lamada.
Yeah.
Don't let it.
Yeah.
Chigzogol, that Koran to Chogolo. Say the Katsang Himang Him, so leg, you're a leg, take a leg, or so teaching. Say the camp and Maris. Yen and Chan give a donut the parut and parchendo, you go not parche the dog cigarettes. The Nichiran give us some Yatara say, give a mambo drum the Chiran said and what Tovia some tangdena, Chiran gave a tell more de Bayana, they give us some said and what in the top cigarettes.
So, not sure if it's about. It says I don't know which verse it is, but it doesn't actually say long life, but it says one's merit and one's happiness and so on increase. But in any case, so the other day we said that. So it is possible that even though we do have a certain lifespan, which is kind of predetermined by our karma, also. So we can't necessarily increase that, but we can also turn away obstacles. And also if one wants to experience a long life, then we can dedicate our merit to that. And then definitely in the next life, we will experience a long life.
Just a line to put it, give it in a chirake that Junta Nipa Kanjima Tagris, Yunti Yam Progress on those, say and Rogri, that makes such a someone to put it.
So it's probably verse number 6 that speaks about when one follows a spiritual teacher, then the faults will dissolve and the qualities will grow like the waxing moon. So it doesn't say the life will increase like the waxing moon, but the qualities.
The Mundoas, no Nebia top the Mundo, caressing Zo Matabari. Ringatang Matabari.
Yeah, if we could extend our lives, then we would have already done that. Many people would live really long lives then. So then you would have people like they're like 200 years old or so. But how many people are 200 years old? So nobody really is 200 years old. So it shows that we cannot really make it longer and longer.
Okay, the next question. How can I love someone in this life?
Mitsetela, teni mila seva khande ki gores. Michigla ben.
Chiegosina penna, sosola, peyo, Mara Tambo. Castle Gaudu, Mana Palagaudu, and Malagaudu. Oh, Yamana, Dundro Simchi Soka Yimbal Gaudu. Kawa sil gaduna, tini te yate yajetane, tini pe ti nangi sini, tini yimbala yang paga yang besor chigores. Chira chuni simji yin la magawa chuni sigumare. Rape na taat zik simji yin la pe nuce chang chang sam tango yorde yin la yang sosu puu la tsewa yorwasi. Pe ti nangi re, chirang pe na, chirang ka pama, yana chirang ka chokpo chomo, yama na chirang ka puu. Tuzo kanga la maga na chirang yang simji yin bata chata hime la sopa tendra la yang tsewa yu sigres. Tendra tsewa sil tsewa ndona tini, tena tsewa yu pa na yin la yang tini teta besor chigores.
So you first start small with somebody that you love. Like, who is it that you love the most? Like, is it your father or your mother, or even is it an animal or whatever, whoever it is? And it's that love that you have to increase. So it also becomes love for all others. So it's not possible that you love nobody. You surely love somebody. For example, even like tigers and like really wild animals that harm a lot of others, they still love their own children. So whoever it is, it could be your parent or your friend, or you could be your child. And even if you don't really like any person, then maybe you love your cat or your dog. So whoever you love, you take that love and you have to make an effort to increase that love. So it's for everybody.
And the next question, with regards to killing of sentient beings, is eating meat purchased from food stores considered as killing of animals, sentient beings?
Tini sokcha se chogum maris tipangoris ra sokcha sokchu pangoris tini mina yang so pena chongka ni shanyona tini ngarang muso ngupo nga sigi yomarwa nga nyotsarwa tiang sokchu begili yongu yorwe.
Pela sokyu gi nipa yongo yo mares. Yena kon rewa mipa mari, dikpa mipa mari ko dikpa yores. Kare sini simji yinse gandu shadwas. Dikpa yores. Yena sokyu nipa seyate nga ge simji ji ngus. Teni tambo hedang ji, teni su gosam. Teni ngus jorwa se. Teni se, teni tama tasu tup song sang ngana sempa jisi yirang ke na, teni sokyu nipa pores. Teni mato xia si ba zang chena sokyu nipa poko yo mares.
So
sama kandri chi sipa yin yang simji yin so la tewa lan rewa ting ting yore pena chira mo ke se sa yo nan da ndre sa yo nan da tin de kap de du tin mbo sin so cha yin ba mang bo se yore se do de simji yin la sama kandri sin simji yin no se ma se ba sama chi yo ma re se ni ba yore se
so it's not. So this specifically is not the negative karma of killing, but it doesn't mean that there is no harm in it. Of course, it is negative karma, but it's not the act of murder, because it's not. It has not. You have not completed the act of killing. So the real act of killing is completed when you see the other animal and you have an emotion like anger, and then you want to kill them. You have this idea of killing them, and then you actually execute it. That thought, so you kill the animal, and then in the end you're pleased. So you're satisfied. So now it is completed. So that constitutes the complete act of killing, the full act of this karmic killing. So when you're just eating the meat, then that is not fulfilled, but it doesn't mean that there is no fault. There still is a fault in it, of course, negative karma. But actually, that fault really arises no matter what food we eat. There's definitely some harm no matter what we eat. For example, even if it's vegetables or some grains and so on, actually the production of these foods also entails killing a lot of insects and different animals. So actually whatever food you eat, there won't be a way of eating without causing any harm at all. So definitely there is some negativity, yes.
Next question. Is there such thing as neutral karma?
Die lungma dengi le se chi yorwe.
Ao
Lungma dengi le. Dine yorwe.
think le kita loma le si he go re te ngacho tara rong gong ji na na chopan ji tin song khare sina loma tin si ha ji mis ro yana ko gewa kin dishi yana magewan dishi gi seng na na tan do na to pa yana gewa yana magewa yores di ge magewa ni mayin ba ji yo mares ro 가지 지랑 셈나 되니 뇽 방운저 첨보 미자 얘나 지랑 뇽 셈들 따라 마렉 바디 요자 대 먹게 와찬도 그래 성물다 제단 로마틴 요레서 망고 송고 요레 얘는 롱 쪼바 그때 로마틴 시에 미스
So there are some who say that there is something like neutral karma, but actually Jigten Sumgen, he said in the Gongchik that there is no neutral karma. It's either virtuous or it's non-virtuous. So we either have a virtuous thought or non-virtuous thought, but we don't have anything that's neither of them. So for example, even if in a moment your mind is not afflicted, there's no special thought in your mind, there still is this underlying ignorance, and ignorance is by nature non-virtuous. So for this reason, he said there's either virtue or non-virtue, but no neutral. But many others do say that there is also neutral karma. Jigten Sumgen says that there is not.
Next question.
게디 니레 로마틴 히미 세 gonchik tasik na yores
Yeah, in the Gongchik root text, it says there's only virtue and non-virtue. There's no neutral karma.
Next question. How do we perform confession when we have done something negative?
And tikpa jisa sunatini shapa khandas phugores.
오 바데 샤파데 나 좋은 유바리 로와 저당 가서 또 비어스네 따라 도지선 검대 냐면서 또 비어요 아다 얘네야 저거 단 유바 세야데 기침보는 안 놓쳐서나 어때가 다 놓쳐 제성선 유바 다 되는 유바스에서 되는 샤파 제서데 되는 domsense 신중에 지기면 사야다 대백 기침보 가래서나 먹게와 때 코랑 좀 샤다리데 이나 코랑 용진지 요래라 보다 먹게와 때라 딕바텔라 용진지 가르스는 코 샤바스는 다야 요레스 단도되는 코랑 대 코랑 용진리스 대인도 다 담본 주바 되니 샤바 되니 dom세 네 신주 지기면 사면 딜로데 미나 지나 샤바 지투고 맞다 배치란 주바 침보 간데지 제와 이나야 신주 dom센데 많이 미나 되니 다동치란데 먹게와 용데 대요레스 대등에 다들은 논트 제수 사냥에 논트 짜만이 지기면서 다 타주고 그래서 되니 지랑 듣고 한다고 그래서
So mainly, first we need to have regret. So basically, we speak about 4 powers when we, in the context of Vajrasattva practice, for instance. And so mainly first we need to cultivate regret. That's very important, so that you really recognize I've made a mistake. And so then once you feel regret, then you confess. And then what's most important then is the mind that thinks, I will not, a commitment of, I will not again repeat such a negative action. So that's very important. It is also said that actually non-virtuous actions are only faults, and they don't really have any qualities, but they have one good quality, and that is their potential to become purified through confession. So confession means so to lay aside, which begins with regret, then the actual confession, and then the commitment of not again repeating those actions. If you do not have that commitment, then you have not purified the negative deed. No matter how much you regret it, if you do not commit yourselves to not again repeat this action, then the continuum of it will remain within your mind. So then, even though you don't do it tomorrow, today you will do it tomorrow. So to really purify it, you will say that from today on, I will not do it again. And so then the negativity will become purified.
Okay, and the last session for today, can I practice Ngondro in the evening? Do I have to practice all parts of Ngondro in one session?
Just two questions, right? Is it?
Yeah.
The first one, can I practice in the evening, right?
Yes.
Then Ngondro di konda nyamlen sena chogereves. Then niba di Ngondro gitun rere nala. Then Ngondro nyamlen chamba chigoreves.
Tara Ngondro de chena tusu kati chena digesi. Nyamni kati chena shoga gonda kati chena tusu yuna chena digres. Teni thori nana lodo namgi di inji mijin rogush. Chena tes lodo namgi samota. Teni chena jamro ta sa yoya che. Teni yang thon yimala yang dosem che. Thon yimbala menda che tende che ka chena digres. Kaze thon chena chaman rogon tes kabe kabore was.
So in terms of the time, you can practice whenever it works for you. Any time is fine. And in terms of what to kind of practice in one session, so definitely in all session, you have to reflect on the four thoughts that turn the mind, no matter what section of the Ngondro you're on. And then, so you reflect on the four thoughts, and then you do whatever section you're on, and then you would do those separately. So if you're practicing refuge, then you just do refuge in that session. Or if you practice Vajrasattva, you just do that in that session, or mandala. So then, so these practices, you keep them in separate sessions. So it would be anyways very difficult to practice them all in one session.
Tate nyamni de kandi chi go yumi te me dunta yuma tene mantun le me kudosa.
So how we should engage in this practice of the Ngondro, we talk about that next week.
Okay, so right now we will proceed to the dedication prayers.
Just that and konde, okay.
By the virtuous accumulations of the three times of myself and all beings in samsara and nirvana, and by this root of virtue, may I and all sentient beings swiftly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious enlightenment.
Janjo semjo rembonje maji banan jinjanje jembanya bamiba kone konde Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Trachidele, see.
Om Benza Sato Samaya Manu Palaya Benza Sato Tinopa Tisharindo Me Bawa Soto Kayo Me Bawa Soto Chayo Me Bawa Anarato Me Bawa Sarva Siddhe Me Parayesa Sarva Karma Susa Me Siddham Shiyam Kuru Ahara Ho Bangare Sarva Tathagata Beza Mame Beza Beza Bhava Ma Samaya Sato